I don't want to hear any more of these lies about reckless spending. We're changing people's lives. And since I took office, families are carrying less debt on average in America. They have more savings than they've had. And we're doing it all while cutting the federal deficit by $1.7 trillion this year and $320 billion last.
Meanwhile,
today, a new report showing that consumer spending dropped last month. That's a huge issue if it continues because consumers drive the American economy. Why are people spending less? Well, listen.
What has that done to your savings?
It's gone. It's depleted. No savings. That's it.
We've gone through our retirement savings more quickly than we had anticipated.
I can tell from having the same budget that I had before all of this, I would get less. It seemed like the bags would get smaller and smaller every time.
And how does President Biden's performance rate? Awful. I mean, I knew that was the answer.
The answer is awful. I mean, I'll compare it to Carter at this point in his presidency, right?
All right, guys, so that is angry Joe Biden defending his so-called American Rescue Plan, right? The $1.9 trillion in spending that we did during his presidency, a stimulus that we did not need, right? A stimulus for an economy that was already red hot because the Democrats wanted to just say that they did a stimulus, right? That Joe Biden is trying to defend that. Again, as Americans are facing an inflation crisis, a crisis that have significantly raised the cost of goods and services in this country, and it doesn't look like there is any relief in sight. In fact, the pain is going to get even worse because the feds are raising interest rates in an effort to try to cool down an overheated economy. In fact, just today, the feds announced that they were raising interest rates by 75 basis points, the largest hike since 1994. Now, here's a quick clip of what that can mean for the average everyday American. Take a look.
And what this does mean is that there will be price increases for things like credit cards, mortgages, student loan payments, and more from this 0.75 percentage point rate hike on the interest rates from the Federal Reserve. This is the largest single increase since 1994. It's also the third individual rate hike this year from the Federal Reserve. This is all part of their plan to curb inflation, but the market was betting on that 0.75 percentage point increase. It really all began on Monday. There were multiple reports coming out about how the markets were anticipating that, and they will see that exact rate hike today. So we're going to hear from Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve Chairman, at the bottom of the hour. He'll explain why the Federal Reserve is taking this step. But the president has been waiting on the Federal Reserve to make a move in terms of interest rate increases because right now the White House does not have a concrete plan to curb inflation, and there's no plan in Congress. So right now all eyes are on the Federal Reserve, and they raised the interest rates 0.75%.
Yeah, guys, so in a nutshell, borrowing money is about to get a whole lot more expensive, which is why we've seen the stock market tank, okay? Based off speculation that money is about to get more expensive, aka interest rates are about to significantly increase, right? And just a tip to you guys. This isn't advice, but I'm just saying. Buy the rumor, sell the news, right? Because the stock market is up now that they were right that the feds were going to increase interest rates by 75 basis points. So if you bought in on Monday when the S&P 500 dropped like 4%, congratulations to you, right? You won the bet. But with that being said, that does not make up for the fact that a lot of Americans are suffering when it comes to their 401ks, their investments, their retirement funds, because of the feds and their interest rate spike that is happening so quickly. Okay, this is something I've been predicting for a long time, guys, for almost a year now. Okay, back when Jerome Powell and Janet Yellen was like, inflation's just going to be transitory, right? Don't worry about it. It's temporary. It'll go away, right? The $1.9 trillion that we pumped into an economy that didn't really need it, don't worry. That has no long-lasting consequences. And I was sitting here and I was like, no. This is not transitory, okay? They were saying that we're not going to have to raise interest rates until the end of 2022, the beginning of 2023, right? That's when we'll start to raise interest rates. And I said, no, I guarantee you, you will be raising interest rates in the spring of 2022 at the very latest, right? If not the winter of 2022. Lo and behold, I was right. I was correct. Okay, so that being said, the mainstream liberal media has started to turn on Biden when it comes to inflation and gas prices because, again, the writing is on the wall, right? But don't let the mainstream liberal media fool you because they gave a full-throated endorsement not to just Joe Biden spending $1.9 trillion, but also spending more than that, right? Wanting them to spend the 5 to 6 trillion plus that progressives and Democrats were considering at one point in time during negotiations. And thanks to Joe Manchin, they were actually able to get it down to 1.9 trillion. But you're going to have people come out here and act like, well, I wasn't on board with that. I didn't want that. Okay, like Joe Scarborough, whom is ripping Joe Biden for all the spending, but at the same time, during January, he was all on board with Joe Biden spending as much as possible. In fact, he was ripping Joe Manchin for not letting Biden spend as much as possible. Take a look.
This is pretty simple stuff. Let me say that again. This is pretty simple stuff. You get the head of the Progressive Caucus, you get Joe Manchin, and you get Joe Biden, and you put them in a room. And you say, we're not going to get out of this room until one of two things happen. One, we have a deal. Or two, we're going to have a press conference where we go out and announce that Joe Manchin does not support any piece of legislation regarding Build Back Better. We either have a bill or Joe Manchin will never support anything, and he's been lying to us for the past year and a half. It's very clear. And my God, I just wonder what would have happened if progressives had gotten their $6 trillion wish earlier this year.
Yeah, in an ironic way, you almost have to thank Joe Manchin for blocking that.
I wouldn't even say ironically thank Joe Manchin. You can just thank Joe Manchin if you're glad that interest rates aren't even higher.
Yeah, so I think that clip speaks for itself. There's not much more commentary I could add there. So with that being said, Joe Scarborough and MSNBC, they're not the only mainstream media outlet that is doing an about face in regards to supporting Joe Biden in reckless spending, as CNN has also come out tough against Joe Biden in regards to inflation and gas prices, and they're basically trying to say, hey, maybe we should not have spent $1.9 trillion last year. Maybe that did overheat the economy. In fact, Jake Tapper is going to press a Biden administration official, Mr. Cedric Richmond, on if this $1.9 trillion bill contributed to inflation, in which Mr. Richmond here is going to give us a voodoo economics explanation of why that is in fact not the case. In fact, he actually goes as far as to say it is the Republicans' fault, okay, for inflation because they did not let Biden spend more money, right? They didn't let Biden spend the 5 to 6 trillion that they originally wanted to spend. Take a look.
But economists were predicting that all the money being injected into the U.S. economy in 2020 and 2021 could help cause inflation. Doesn't President Biden bear some responsibility for how bad things are?
No, if you look at, Jake, if you look at the president's three-pronged plan, in the beginning it was to pass the American Rescue Plan so we could get shots in arms, get schools back open, get the economy open and not shut down again, which all happened. And then it was to go do the bipartisan infrastructure bill so that we could finally start investing in American infrastructure, creating jobs right here in the United States, jobs that pay well. And then the third prong was to reduce those household costs, the cost of health care, the cost of elder care, the cost of child care, and continue to bring household costs down. And all of the economists said if we passed the last portion of it, it would do that. And so what you have is Republicans purposely obstructing it and keeping it from happening, then at the same time saying inflation is high. And we know we have work to do there. But the Republican opposition, just for the sake of opposition to legislation that would bring household costs down, is what's continuing to spark it. But the president also laid out his plan to continue to deal with inflation, to continue to deal with rising gas prices. He wants to continue to pay down the debt. We've done that more than, or the president has done that more than any other president in this short time period. And the question becomes, why won't the Republicans really seriously take up the end of the president's agenda, which would allow him to tax the rich so that we can continue to pay down the debt, reduce the deficit, which would also reduce inflation.
Well, you're blaming that on Republicans, but Democrats controlled the Senate.
Yeah, so that is Jake Tapper there with some rare journalism, right? Pressing Cedric Richmond on his ridiculous Bidenomics, voodoo-nomics talking points about basically how it's the Republicans' fault they were having inflation because they did not let him pass the most radical portions of his Build Back Better agenda, right? The part of the bill that was going to cost $3 to $4 trillion plus dollars, right? That is what Cedric Richmond is saying. And even Jake Tapper sitting there like, bruh, that makes no sense whatsoever. Because first and foremost, you're responsible for pushing legislation that has contributed to inflation, which is all the spending that we did, first and foremost. Second of all, there were two Democrats in the Senate, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, that stood in the way of the Democrats passing their more radical agenda because they were afraid of this situation right here that is happening, right? That's what they were afraid of, and that's why they stopped you. So it wasn't the Republicans that stopped you, because if two of those Democrats got on board, they could have done reconciliation and, spent $5 to $6 trillion if they wanted to. And again, if we would have spent $5 to $6 trillion, which is what the Biden administration wanted to do, we would be raising interest rates by, who knows, 3, 4, 5, 6, 700 basis points, right? Not the 75 that we're raising it today. Okay, so the Democrats had it their way, inflation would be even worse. Again, because their idea of lowering costs for families is, giving out stimulus checks for people who have children, right? The child tax credit, okay, which was a direct payment. That also contributed to overheating the economy, right? So with that being said, CNN, again, is not really having it. As one of their data analysts, Mr. Harry E10, who, again, analyzes polls and forecasts for the election, stuff like that, he told it like it is when it comes to the Joe Biden presidency and inflation thus far.
Put this inflation in context. How bad is the surge in prices?
It's awful. I mean, it's awful, and how people feel about it is even worse. You look at the consumer sentiment right now, and what do you see? This is the worst consumer sentiment ever measured by the University of Michigan, going all the way back since 1952.
Wow.
You basically, even if you double my age, that doesn't get you back to 1952. And while I'm young, I'm not that young, right? The second worst, 1980. The third worst, 1980. I don't have to remind you. Inflation got Jimmy Carter. It killed that presidency. And in terms of why are consumers feeling this bad? Well, it's pretty clear why they're feeling this bad. And that is because the consumer price index is the worst it's ever been in a midterm cycle since 74. It's the worst it's been in any presidential cycle or midterm cycle since 1980. So it's not much of a surprise. You can see it. It's literally off the charts on the table on your screen.
And how does President Biden's performance rate?
Awful. I mean,
I knew that was the answer.
The answer is awful. I mean, I'll compare it to Carter at this point in his presidency, right? Look at the disapproval rating Joe Biden has on inflation right now. It's over 70%. Carter was not even there at this point in mid-1978. When you're doing worse than Jimmy Carter's doing in the minds of Americans on inflation, you know that they're holding you responsible for the conditions that are currently on the ground that are hurting Americans in their pocketbooks.
Yeah, so once again, that is a rare moment. That I'm saying quite a bit on mainstream liberal media when it comes to them criticizing Joe Biden and going after him, rightfully so, for inflation and gas prices and just how disastrous his presidency has been thus far. I mean, it's kind of amazing watching the mainstream liberal media, slob on this guy's knob for a year and a half straight, okay, except briefly when it comes to certain stuff like Afghanistan. But for the most part, they were all in support of Joe Biden. They was all in support of this spending, okay? And now all of a sudden they're like, inflation is not good, right? Gas prices are not good, okay? How did this happen? Why did this happen? And they're putting the blame exactly where it should be, right? Again, rare moment from the mainstream liberal media. I just wish they would have got on board with this, before Biden got in office, right? That would have been nice. Maybe we wouldn't have this guy in office had the mainstream liberal media not been so biased in the first place in order to get him in office, right? Because Trump was bad. Orange Man was the worst thing ever. The cause of America's problems was Orange Man. Okay, but I'm pretty sure a lot of these guys, including these CNN analysts, are probably missing Orange Man. Not just because the economy is terrible, because their ratings are terrible as well too. Which is why you're seeing them now all of a sudden go out to Joe Biden for this stuff, because they know, well, this is how we're going to get viewers, right? Start talking bad about the administration and telling it like it is, then, you know, maybe people will actually watch our network, right? So with that being said, let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.